listener production.
The creators of this podcast would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which it is recorded. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first storytellers of this land. We pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, as well as any Indigenous people who may be listening today.
Hello and welcome to Two Guys, One Earn. Final episode, wrap-up episode of Two Guys, One Earn, a Cricket Ashes World Test Championship adjacent podcast. It's got a nice catchy title. That's the good news about this podcast. We are here after the 5th Ashes Test, which I believe, I got to be honest with you, in the way that this series has been rated, I'm going to claim a moral victory. I reckon we won this one. I'm going to take the lead of Stuart Broad and just say that we won this one. Joining me for this final episode, Adam Spencer. How are you this morning, Adam?
I can't imagine that the Poms, would they be happy to win that way? I mean, seriously? That's the question everyone's asked every time they've lost in this series. Can you really live with yourselves dismissing us twice in total for less than what you scored? I mean, really? Really? Can I just from the outset, Will, before we dive deep into the cricket, because I'm sure there will be over the next hour or so claims of what's fair and what's not and justice and things like that. They've dogged the entire series. So to set our sort of moral compass, can I start by saying whatever we say about the 5th Test in the Ashes, any claims of fairness or injustice there, pale in comparison. And I'm saying this on behalf of you. You'll be too modest to say it yourself, but I'm saying it on behalf of everyone listening. To the judges in the category of most outstanding entertainment program in the 2023 Logies, to salute the Cheap Seats Network 10 over RuPaul's Drag Race Down Under season 2 on Stan. I mean, what's going on there?
I mean, what is going on there? And as, obviously Gruen Nation was nominated in that exact same category.
Were you? I'm so sorry.
We've claimed moral victory.
Oh, good.
We believe we've actually won that one.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. I just
We've
saw
looked
RuPaul's.
back.
Yeah, okay.
No, RuPaul's, it turns out, not in the spirit of Australian television. It's an international format.
Oh.
So
I just saw that and voted. I didn't even look down far enough down the list to see you.
No,
Sorry,
mate. Gruen Nation. Yeah. Very, very plucky second.
Oh, plucky.
They don't release the rankings of the rest of the order, but I choose to believe a very plucky second.
Absolutely. As you would have been in most popular entertainment program behind Gogglebox.
Oh, no. That one, read out the rest of the names if you've got them there, because it's like Lego Masters, The Masked Singer.
Lego Masters, The Voice, and Australia's Got Talent. They probably filled out the podium with you and, you know that thing in the Olympics where you see some Aussie in the 1500 and they're just trying to beat the woman from Belarus in the last, that's you and Hard Quiz coming down the...
No, mate, Hard Quiz is a phenomena as well. Gruen, we are, you know what, we're the equivalent of the Olympics. We're that novelty story about the guy who's qualified for the Olympics but never swum in a 50-metre pool.
Yep.
You know, he's doing great for a guy who's never swum in a 50-metre.
You're the guy who's about to get lapped in the 5,000 is just trying to hold on so that you get the bell before that other person, the second last person in the race, finishes.
Yeah, you're in that photo they tend to run, which is proof Katie Ledecky is the greatest swimmer of all time, and it's just her finishing a race, and then the rest of the frame is empty. But in our version, it's just me still swimming in the opposite direction.
Yeah, turning and going back. Did I remember the name from a long, long time ago at your school athletics carnival? Was it Harry Ramachandran?
Ramesh Harrichandran.
Ramesh Harrichandran, not Harry Ramesh. Ramesh Harrichandran.
It's so close.
Went out at the 200-metre mark of your 800 metres in high school running event. Just when everyone started.
I'm going to go even further than this. So it was the 800.
Yep.
And he would run the 400 in world record time.
And you think, wow.
This kid, you would be like, okay, next step.
Here
the Olympics. And it turns out that the next step was actually into the back of an ambulance and then off to the emergency ward at the local hospital 2 years in a row. That's the thing that is the great thing about the story. if it happened once, you'd look back on it and you'd say, you know what, Ramesh, I feel bad for you. You didn't know. You're a kid.
Yeah.
You got out there. You did what you thought you were going to do. You didn't know you had asthma.
Yeah.
But the second year in a row it happened. That's on Ramesh.
Yeah. But he'd come in that second year with a big – he'd had a few Ks in the legs. He'd had a big preseason training load and he thought he had it.
One of the all-time great kids, by the way, Ramesh Harichandran, one of like the guys I loved, one of the first people from a different culture that I'd really ever met growing up in regional Victoria. And I loved Ramesh, but he was so funny. But my other favourite story about Ramesh was that, Mr. Payne, who was our PE teacher.
Oh, perfect.
He used to get us in the gym. He was a tough man too. Had a lot of like Navy tattoos.
Yeah, great.
He'd been in a prisoner of war camp where they cut his Achilles tendons. Yeah. Laurie Payne, he was one of the all-time great men. Payne, but like pain by name, pain by nature. So couldn't run anymore because that's why they would slash your Achilles so that you wouldn't run away in the prisoner of war camps. But he was this like hard little nugget of a man, like with these like Navy tattoos, and couldn't run because of his Achilles. But he would get us in the gym. And we'd all do weights, like you'd have to do that sort of compulsory exercise program for PE. And so this would be, I could still say this, like 30 years later, if I went up to anyone I went to school with that I haven't spoken to them in 30 years and I said this one expression, they would all immediately know what it means, because every time we would have to do we'd do 10 reps, right hand, 10 reps, left hand. So Laurie would be up the front. He'd be telling us, what hand it was. And then just in the midst of all this like teenage grunting, you would just hear Laurie say time and time again, your other left hand, Ramesh. And to this day, your other left hand, Ramesh, is like still part of my vernacular because it just happens so often. And it just the tone of voice that, like, when Laurie had to say it, but like was saying it, he was a hard man, but he was saying it with kindness, but your other left hand, Ramesh.
Just quickly before we dive into the cricket, my favourite recently.
I'm in no rush. I'm fine. We can talk about whatever we want for a while.
Recently acquired school sports story. So I I've met Leah. Spoke about when I went on Philosophy episode 2 ever. Yep. I mentioned at the end of it I was starting to do a bit of online dating, and the person I met there, Leah and I, now married. And we went for a bit of a drive up to where she grew up. And we were checking out her neck of the woods. And it wasn't the ritziest, wealthiest suburb on the central coast of New South Wales. And you know how people often you can get into a bit of a, you think it was when you grew up. Yeah, well, when I grew up, sort of comparisons. And we were driving, we were going to go and check out the school that she used to go to, a primary school, and then find her old house and see what was going on. And we're driving down the main street and sort of memory lane experience for her. And she looks over, she goes, that's Sarah's house. Yeah. We had it was a very small school that Leah used to go to. We had our school swimming carnival in their backyard pool one year. And I'm thinking, gee, like Sarah and her family are doing all right if you're hosting the school swimming carnival in, like, it must be at least 25 metres and like 6 or 8 lanes.
You'd imagine.
Wow.
It's the amount of lanes even rather than the length.
Yeah.
That I'm like, because the idea that you need to have a carnival.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen long pools in people's backyards, maybe like a 20-metre pool that you could do like,
single lane, tumble tone,
right?
But but enough.
Couple of lanes maximum.
Enough for your 4 schoolhouses at least. And then, and Leah said to me, no, it was just an in-ground pool. It was the only pool we had. So it was just like a standard backyard pool that was like, 6 or 8 metres long and a little bit wide. And it was just sort of, okay, under 7s, 5 laps, in you go.
But how many at a time? Like, how wide is this thing?
It was just a standard, reasonably large backyard pool.
And they're just putting 8 kids in and just going, there you go. Good luck. You know what? It's only 8 metres long, but the fact that there are 10 of you in here at the same time will make it more difficult to get to the end regardless.
Exactly. So they used to have the very first swimming gold medal Australia ever won, and we have such a proud tradition of Olympic swimming, was by a guy called Freddie Lane. And at the Olympics in, I'm guessing 1908 or 12, he won the 200-metre obstacle swim.
Oh.
It was in Paris, so it was in the river, the Seine, and it's just sort of 200 yard, the equivalent of 50 yards. You'd swim, and across the width of the pool or the lake, there was a chain every 15 yards. So there were 3 chains across.
Like hurdles, hurdles for swimmers.
You'd swim to the first one, and on each chain in front of where the person was swimming was like a small sort of rowboat. So you'd swim the first bit, climb over the rowboat, keep going, swim to the second one under, third one over, tap, go back. That's your 200 metres, 200 yards. How on earth did that get scrapped from the Olympic program?
I mean, bring it back.
The obstacle swim.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like every city that hosts the Olympics, like Brisbane has a great river going through the middle of that city.
Yeah.
Come on, Brisbane Olympics. You always get to choose a couple for your home games, don't you?
You have demonstration sports.
And
exactly.
Australians, what are we good at the Olympics? What is it that we're already pre-existingly good at? Swimming.
Yeah.
Dominate the swimming.
Yeah.
So this is just an extra event that most likely – and you know what? Give it an Australian flavour. Chuck in a couple of stingrays and sharks, see what happens.
Every Olympics, we must have a lot of really good swimmers who just aren't quite good enough. They can't quite go.
Well, we know that, right?
Yeah.
But if you see Cody Simpson in the obstacle swimming,
mate,
tell me that's not bringing people from all over the world. Hey, speaking of ideas around sporting events that might make them more interesting, I was talking to Mike, who is the producer of this podcast, and a big thank you to Mike for not only getting these episodes recorded and coordinated, but also he gets them up straight away so that they're as relevant as they can be to the test matches. So it's been a big thing, extra workload. But he's also a cricket fan, and so we have these little chats about cricket off air before we do the podcast as well. And he floated an idea to me that I like, which is 5-day tests are too short is the answer. Like a lot of people are saying they're too long, right? A lot of people are saying they should be 4-day tests. But I would argue it's been so enjoyable to have the cricket on it all the time that they are too short is actually the problem. It wasn't the days we were playing cricket that were the problem during the last couple of months. It were the days we were not playing cricket.
Okay.
Second problem. Right? So you've got to agree to the terms of the problems before we can address the problems.
I'll just as a quick sidebar, I'll note your reflection that it was that the problem was the days we weren't playing cricket is probably an opinion held more closely by the fans and spectators than by the fast bowlers from the two teams.
No. Okay. Well, this is where it gets interesting.
Oh, okay.
Because my major disappointment from this series, other than the eventual result, was the fact that I don't think that the Australians use their bowlers properly. Like I know Lyon being out through, spanner in the works, but I'm sad that they did not give Nessa a test. I just could not believe that either in the 4th or 5th test that Nessa didn't play. And I think that this idea of squad depth and being able to experiment with, you saw it with England and them changing their squad. How about it's a continuous test? So we take the pre-existing 25 days of the test and we play one large 25-day long super test where you pick squads. So day to day, there are different, you're using different members of your squad. Like people are subbing in and out. So they'd be forced, their hand would be forced to on, say, day 3 go, all right, well, we've got to play Nisa. Like we don't have the luxury of a few days off. We've got to create a few days off by using this bowler in this circumstance, or we've got to play Boland, or we're going to have to sub in this different batsman because – so you just play the test. So instead of it being like a 5 – because the series we retain the urn and then people get mixed feelings about whether the series is still alive. If it's just a 25-day test in a row, you're just constantly like, how are we doing at the moment? Look, we're 800 behind, but we've still got 3 innings left. So is it 5 tests back to back across 25 days, or is it just one massive test and it might go 7 innings each or 8 innings each? It just depends how long. That's a good question. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, the English, that you get all your scores and wickets, right? So that's a rolling. We need some mechanism. Whereas if you win the first test by 3 wickets, going into the second part of it, you still get to have those 3 batsmen bat.
Just say you win the first test.
Yeah.
As Pat Cummins bowls Jimmy Anderson, stump goes rolling back, and Australia have won that first test by 50 runs.
Yeah.
Did David Warner and Usman Khawaja just race off the pitch anyway and put the pads back on because 10 minutes from now the next innings is starting? Does it just keep rolling and rolling and rolling, or?
Yep. Okay. So there's one toss. The toss is at the start of the series.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does take pitch doctoring out of the equation to some extent, doesn't it?
To every extent, I would have thought. How's it going to hold up on day 25?
I'd love to see in India. Given that they start with a day 9 test wicket.
Yeah, all right.
Imagine the condition that Hyderabad would be in.
We think on day 25 it's going to take some spin.
Mitchell Starc is disappearing into his own footprints down to his knee.
All right, I understand that's a slight logistical flaw. It's a new idea, so there's going to be some kinks.
Yeah, that's all right.
How about this? One of the other flaws that people could perhaps suggest in this, because what I like the idea is that, okay, maybe the idea that there is both individual tests but an overall test happening at the same time, not a series. So, say for example, so the best example is, I think, Australia win the first test by 2 wickets, right? So then going into the next day, which starts the next day, those 2 wickets still get to bat, but it is technically the start of the second test. You get the value that you accrued in the previous test taken immediately into the next test, right?
And if you win by 78 runs, the other team has to score 7. They start effectively at
before
minus 78.
For that particular test. So you could divide it into individual tests, but it's got a rolling cumulative test score. So now...
So if you win the first test by an innings and 200 runs, it's a long way back for the other team.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you got 24 days to make up that difference. So, you know what I mean? So, it depends how you look at it. Now,
and do you start with what? Have you got 30 reviews, and you just got to be careful not to burn all 30 of them in the first couple of days?
No, here's what you can do, though, because I remember when we worked together at Triple J, quite famously in the last year of us being on air, because you'd worked at the ABC for long enough and you didn't take days off.
Yes.
There was a particular day during the year where you said, I could literally take sick days and days I'm owed. I could retire today.
It was 3 weeks, 15 sick days a year fully paid. I'd had 7 years of a frontline shift and not taken a sick day. I had 105 sick days. So there was a point in around June where I could have said, I'll see you for the final show.
Yeah. So here's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
If you don't use a review, if you get to the end of your second innings and you've got you haven't used 2 reviews, those reviews roll on. Yeah, they're up your sleeve now. But I'm going to introduce an even more exciting element, because this is when it gets really exciting, right? Because when you plan a game over 25 days, there's a lot more intrigue and ways to – so you can also borrow from your future self.
Wow.
So this is where it gets dangerous.
Like trading away next year's draft pick to try and secure a top 5 pick this year.
Yeah. So if you're in the second test and you've burnt 3 reviews, but you're sure this one is absolutely worth a review, you can loan. You go, you know what? We'll go into the third test with 2. That's it.
Can I suggest what you can do? Also, you've got your standard review, but if you really need the wicket, you can grab an extra one from and you can super review it. And in the case of the super review, that's when we bring the umpire from this series, Joel Wilson, who's clearly legally blind and doesn't understand the rules of the game, and he just comes out and goes, "Yeah, what the hell?" You get one Joel Wilson decision per series.
I'm going to suggest over 25 days, maybe we just go back to country cricket style. someone from the team who's not currently involved in the action has to at least do umpire at square leg. We have one main umpire and one from the list that isn't currently playing umpire at square leg.
When I was in, it's either 5th grade or 6th grade, because I went to a new school in 5th grade and 6th grade, and might have been 5th grade because they had an established school cricket team, and I sort of made it, didn't quite, so I'd play a game or not play a game, but I'd go away every Friday with the school team to play. And we used to, one of the kids, a teacher, we couldn't send a teacher one week, so their teacher was umpiring, and I was umpiring at square leg, and one of their bowlers was continually overstepping, like by a step or two when he bowled it. And I sort of mentioned something to their umpire. Look, I think this guy's running a bit further than he could. And he did it again and bowled one of our guys. And as a 10-year-old, I called a no ball from square leg, overriding the authority of a 35-year-old teacher who was from the guy's school. Yeah. And he's just staring at me. And I don't even know if you're allowed to call a no ball from square leg as the square. But
seems like the weirdest place to do it from. I would have thought.
I could clearly see he was stepping over, but he was planting his front.
If it's enough that you can see it from square leg, it probably is a no ball.
And I can just remember standing there with my arm out and feeling so good about myself as I did it, until the moment that guy then looked at me, and I just hadn't thought it through and gone, "You are going to be held accountable for this." And there was just this awkward silence that felt like hours. It was probably only a few seconds before this guy finally choked back his rage and said to his guy, okay, it's not out, mate, don't step over. So I felt I'd stood up for the forces of right.
So when my dad was playing cricket when I was young, and I was like hopeless at junior cricket, but sometimes I wasn't hopeless. I was a real in between, never, like, not bad enough to give it up.
Yep.
Not good enough to be good at it. That was very much my capacity when it came to cricket.
You rarely single-handedly Ben Stokes style swung the game.
I don't think ever.
But
I can't actually remember ever single-handedly swinging a game.
But you played on a few teams that won a bit.
Yeah. Okay. That was honestly I was never one of those people who didn't get picked.
Yep.
But I can't ever remember winning a game with bat or ball by myself ever in the history of me doing any of those things.
So in the Australian team at the moment, you'd be Cameron Green.
Yeah, unfortunately, but I wasn't as good a fielder.
Okay.
So anyway, I used to umpire a bit, and it never occurred to me that people would cheat. Like, my dad is such an honest person, and was, particularly when it came to cricket and the idea of it, it just never occurred to me that, and I always remember being a kid, like, maybe 13 or 14, like really genuinely a kid, like ended up umpiring these, country games. And I took it very seriously. I tried to do it all really well, and I think I probably did an okay job. But I remember one day, like this, now, like in retrospect, like this adult man, accusing me of cheating some decision, and like yelling, literally, would get you banned from the game today if you yelled at an umpire in this way. But the thing that I remember is, like, I was a child, and like, not a child who was cheating, a child who, I may have made a mistake. I was a child.
Children do cricket, sometimes. Yeah.
Something that turns out professional adults find difficult to do. So
I got one final one before we maybe move on to the matter at hand.
No need to.
On the topic of dads who really played by the rules. So my dad created a local cricket team for my brother and I and our mates to play. And we turned out reasonably handy. Had a couple of mates who could really play. So won more games than we lost and had a pretty good time. But we were playing back in the day on the big ovals where you'd go and you'd just put out that each team's kit bag had a series of little flags, and you'd run around and hammer in the flags, and that was your boundary. But under the official rules of the comp, and because that was a little bit arbitrary, under the rules of the comps that we played in, you could only score a 4 on a ground that was flagged. You could not be given a 6. The ball had to clear a fixed fence for it to be called
Sure.
as a 6. It was just it was some rule that probably applied at a lot higher levels that they were just putting in for us. And so there were only a couple of grounds each season or a couple of matches where you were a chance to hit a 6 because you needed to be playing against a team who was bowling some long hops on a ground with a fixed fence. And that was normally, if you were playing on that, by definition, probably a ground, we were under 12s, probably a ground where a lot of older people played as well. So the fence was a long way back.
Yeah.
But whenever there was a fence, you wouldn't put the flags in. You'd play with the fence, and there'd just be a lot less fours hit often. But we were playing at North Ryde Oval against North Ryde RSL once, and I was batting and going all right. And this guy came on to bowl who was the definition of a part-time bowler they were just giving a chance to, and he's bowling spin and just tossing them up. And I hit a couple back, and they're clearly not even looking like they're moving or anything. And we're playing at North Ryde RSL's Oval, and it's got a fence. And I'm thinking, you don't get many chances. Let's have a crack here.
Go for glory.
He lobs the next one up, and I take 2 steps down the wicket. And anyone who's played cricket will know that when you've decided in advance, I'm going to charge here. And as the ball comes out of the hand and you're moving forward, but you pretty quickly get a feeling for, I think this is going to land. Yeah, okay, I think I'm going to be in exactly the right spot to pick this up on the half volley. And I hit it and just swung as hard as I could. And that beautiful moment in cricket where if you truly hit the ball, you almost don't feel it leave the bat because you just hit it so sweetly on and it just goes and goes and goes. And I'm feeling so good about myself. North Ryde RSL also used to play baseball. So around this ground, there's a fence that's about a metre 20 high, all the way around the ground.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Until you get to the batting cage of the baseball, where because someone can flick it off the top of the bat and it flies up, the fence suddenly rises to probably 10 metres high, drops down, keeps going. The ball I hit the top of the 10-metre fence for the baseball area and then continued over the fence. And I was standing there feeling pretty good about myself as Larry Spencer put out his arm and signalled 4.
Oh, what?
Because the ball hit the fence.
Oh, I mean,
and I was just looking at my dad going,
come on, Larry.
Dad.
What are you doing?
And he's going, it's 4. Ball hit the fence, son. Back you go. Next ball, I got stumped by about 11 metres because I just sprinted out to try and repeat the task.
Try to do it again, of course.
Just so misty, red-eyed in anger that I was going to show my dad I missed it by a metre.
And instead, your dad taught you a valuable lesson about hubris, flying too close to the sun.
Exactly.
Lesson learned, son, he said. He put his hand on your shoulder and just said, remember this.
Yes, a lesson that perhaps if a couple of guys in the current Australian team had learnt at my age, things would have gone slightly different.
Okay, so the final test. Here's what annoyed me about Australia losing this final test. Not that we lost, because I honestly think if you look back at this series, a more realistic result for the balance of play across the entire series is probably 2-2, right?
Completely fair.
Yeah, and you've got to say hats off to they made it. The fact that there were so many results was all because of them. They were the ones who made the running, one way or the other. When they lost or when they won, it was kind of because of a lot of the time because of the risks that they'd taken or the pace with which they played. And I think that's great for English cricket. It's probably great for cricket in general to have a more attacking style. I think Australia need to remember how we can have a more attacking style, because we almost, I think, decided we were going to beat them by being the complete opposite of them when some of our actual core values aren't being like that. But the thing that annoyed me about us losing this 5th test was that we should have won it. That's the thing that annoys me. On the first day, if we'd taken any of those 5 catches, that 80 runs that Carey let,
Harry Brook
make.
Yeah.
that was the difference
Game's
in the end.
over.
I know you can play that like all the time,
No, but if we roll them for 150, 160,
it's a completely
that game's
different
probably
game.
over. Yep.
And then the other one is coming into the fifth day. I know when you look at that final target, and even what we got was a huge score for a fourth innings, but it wasn't an ordinary fourth innings. That pitch wasn't an ordinary fifth day pitch. And us going in with 250 to get 0 wickets down, like we should have got that. Like I know it's tough, but like we got ourselves in a position to win. And then after lunch, we were in a position to win again. When we had 150 left and Smith and Head were still in, we were still in a position to win then. And
the point I'd make, and it's both groups of fans have been throwing at the opposing groups of fans the claim that you're just a bunch of whingers. And if you're deeply embedded with the England cause, it sounds like that. But the selection, the change of ball from that ball on day 4,
that's true,
to that thing on day 5, and on day 4, it's England's choice to prepare absolute batting roads because that suits Bazball. But if you do that and then you're getting carted, that's the risk you take. And they were getting carted. And then a ball hits Usman in the back of the head. The English convince the umpires to change the ball. Yeah, okay, I'm still with you there. And they take this thing that is dull, lifeless, soft, moribund, and pull the ball out, and you can look at the photos and the images of it, that is shiny, that you can still read all of the embossed print on one side with a pronounced seam and say, oh, here you go. Have a crack at this in fading light with a bit of moisture overhead. And for just 2 overs, then it darts around all over the place. And they come in overnight, and we lose 3 for 20. It beggars belief that you can this is why it's so hard to win a series in England. And England would rightly feel that the elements interceded in the 4th test in a way that massively helped Australia. But the elements came to the party so hard for England in this one, because you come in on day 5 and suddenly it's overcast, and it's going to start darting around, and the umps have said, while you're there, why don't you have a ball, one side of which is pretty much brand new and rock hard, and the other one's a bit scuffed. Best of luck, chaps. And guys who the day before couldn't move it a millimetre it's a miracle we weren't 5 down at the end of that first session, because Head and Smith couldn't hit how big the balls were swinging.
I agree with that. Like, I certainly, and look, I think England had the best of the conditions generally across the series.
Yeah. There was a moment in the second test where Cummins and Boland were unplayable for about 20 minutes, got 2 wickets, and then it rained.
Yeah, that was it.
And the number of
weirdly
times,
enough, like even with the change of ball on the 4th day here, the fact that Warner and Khawaja were already in, would have been better for them to be dealing. Like if they'd been able to keep playing on day 4 when they were in and going, rather than having to start again the next morning, from scratch again, it might have been a different thing. Yeah, the conditions sort of even out. But it is funny in cricket, isn't it, how it is a game of margins in regard to the fact that it's like fine to want to continually change the ball if the ball isn't doing what you want it to do. But put a bit of sandpaper in your pocket and that's it. That's the end of it's, so you can spit on it. I love it. It's always got a real set of rules of what you can and can't do. It's very clear about its kinks, the ball in cricket, isn't it? You can exchange it, but you can't sandpaper it. You can spit on it. You can put your sweat on it, but you can't spit on it.
You can rub your hand on your back very close to where it looks like you've just applied some Denka rub if you're listening Jimmy Anderson. And so that was, just the clear impact that had on the game was unfortunate, because I think our guys go very close to getting that. If you're playing with that old rock, I think we get there reasonably comfortably.
If we had the ball on day 4, Khawaja and Warner might have got him. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. But and that's why I say there was those different times in the game where I think we had it, because even despite all that, when Stokes fucked that catch in the celebration just before lunch, I was like, you know what? All we need is Smith and Head to bat for sort of another hour here at the pace that they're batting, and we are just absolutely within striking range for the rest of them to knock off and then it just like I still think at that point, if this was meant to be the era defining tour to win without Nathan Lyon in England, where we hadn't done it for 20 years, that would have been, I mean, don't get me wrong, Paddy Cummins has gone to the UK to win the World Test Championship and retain the Ashes, and he's done both of them. So you shouldn't, there is the two at the start aren't any less worthy than the two at the end. In fact, you can make arguments the two at the start are much more valuable than the two at the end, right? But we wanted to win. Like, we wanted to go over and win both, and we didn't quite. And that's disappointing, because in this match, if it had been one of those matches where you're like, we didn't have opportunities to win it, then you'd be like, fair enough. They finished stronger. But the truth of it is that I think we had as many opportunities, if not more opportunities, in this game to win as they did.
Yeah, and I mean, of all the the games in the series that teams should have won and didn't, England can put their hand up big for the fourth test, absolutely. But we had more opportunities to win the third and the fifth that we blundered than they had to win either of the first two that they blundered. You know what I mean? If you look at the 2-2s and who could have nicked one of those off the other, we could, quite possibly should have been in a position more that even if it hadn't rained in the fourth test, we got it up 3-2 or whatever.
Well, I mean, that's kind of been the joy of this series, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Other than the fourth test, which was rained out, the rest of them from day to day, you can't really tell who's winning.
No.
Or who's in front, or who the best team is, or what the best style is, or who's playing what style of, like, it feels like a TV series where every test has been a slightly different director this series, or it's quite like, we're doing what now?
Yeah.
What are we doing now?
But it'll be interesting because, and I know also it's such a mental game that you put on a brave face to the press because the opposition's going to hear what you're saying and all that sort of stuff. But the thing that marks, great individuals or teams in sport is even when they have a degree of success, they're not afraid of really analysing and looking back at what happened and holding themselves accountable. And if this Australian team's honest about that series, while it's an absolutely admirable result, and while playing the additional World Championship test beforehand,
and so closely in a row,
in that ridiculously compressed time frame.
Yeah, I know. But what if
also disadvantages?
For example, we'd had a 30-day test where India only played the first 5 days, and Australia get to take whatever into the first Ashes. I mean, that's a bit unfair on England. But
maybe a 30-day test where WWE, tag team style, at any time India can just tag out and say, Bazball, get in here. And so we're playing them combined. But that with the constricted length of the series, which was, pretty full on.
Demanding.
It's a tremendous effort. But Australia, once they're behind closed doors back here, there's a couple of really fundamental questions, not just about individual moments and all, but I think there's some fundamental questions about.
And what are they, do you think? Because I agree. So, I think there's two things you can say. This is a success, but it is a success that also asks a lot of questions about what happens from here on. So what do you think those big questions are?
Well, the David Warner question's out there publicly, and did he do enough in that last test to justify having kept him in for a while where it looked like he was struggling, and it has been for a long time now.
Honestly, when you look back at this series, he did fine, right? He did fine, but whether it was a good idea for us to have him in there, whether that was the winning move. He never played a winning innings. He did fine. If you look back at, compared to what you would have possibly expected when you came into it, I think he had a couple of decent knocks. He took the shine off the ball a few times. He only looked absolutely hopeless in one test. The rest of it, he never looked like the David Warner of old, but he looked like, he could get some stuff done. But was it the right decision to win the Ashes to take him in? They did, and they're going to have to live with that.
And when you go into the final test with the luxury of, look, if it all goes horribly wrong, we've still technically got away with this. It's not up for grabs anymore. The decision not to give Nessa a go is a very interesting one. But the thing that I find more interesting overall, and, you look at the other sport that we love, AFL football, where the coach is all powerful. And the coach in the middle of a game can just say to a player, that's it, you're off. Thanks. You're not playing anymore in that game. And their power is so unquestioned that once or twice a season you'll see a player dispute a coach's decision. And it is front page news for the next few days of, did you see the dummy spit from that person? When the coach can say to a defender who's never played up forward before in the middle of a game, get up the other end of the field now and kick us some goals, please. They're just all powerful. I appreciate entirely that the cricketing structure is different and there's more of a feeling that when it's out there in the middle, it's the team and the captain who decides. But not taking anything away from Pat Cummins' lion-hearted performances across the 6 tests and his winning us the first test with his batting and his skill levels often. But any objective looking at what's going on, there were several moments across the series where clearly out in the middle we didn't have it together. And that's not in the vagaries of you could try this, you could try that. But when you've got a situation where every commentator and every ex-player who is analysing online is saying, Zach Crawley is born to edge the ball 6 inches outside off stump, that's where you've got to be bowling.
Yeah.
Or this is a tail ender, bowl at the fucking stumps, please. I find it really interesting that it's not a scenario, and not every 2 minutes sending out a new plan, but when in a crucial stage of a 5-day game, you're 45 minutes into a plan that isn't, it's not quite working. You're getting bludgeoned, and it's clearly wrong. And I'm not slating Andrew McDonald as an individual. That the command structure there, where the coach couldn't even just once or twice a series send out a message, I don't care what anyone says, for the next 20 minutes, for these number 9, 10 and 11 batsmen, you're bowling at the stumps or whatever, because there were clearly times when we were making terrible decisions on the field.
But I wonder, it's hard for us to know, but I wonder who is making those decisions, because for a lot of it, it felt like maybe this is McDonald and Cummins' plan. Particularly early on when we were still getting the job done, there was a bit of me that they were saying to us, trust the plan, stick with the plan. We've got a plan. We've thought about this. We know what we're doing. And they were getting the results. So you kind of got to go, okay, well, it doesn't seem like you do, but it is actually working. And then it stopped working. And so I think it's then you're able to go, yeah, this wasn't a good plan.
No, and it didn't just stop working in England's second innings in the 5th test where they came out and really flew for a day.
No, it got dismantled. They should have known from the minute Scott Boland got dismantled in the first test that this was a different England, like that they had plans of how they were going to attack things.
Yeah, that's when our master plan needed a bit of an asterisk against it or a couple of sub-clauses. But from the 3rd test onwards, it's totally up to the team and the hierarchy to decide. But I think if you're really evaluating things, there's several moments there when you can ask about your command and decision-making structure. Not should we have done something differently, but should our structure have been such that people who are not in the emotional cut and thrust of the moment quite as much, who are sitting in the sheds and seeing the replays and probably even hearing the input of dozens of other people around them if they want, go, yeah, Ricky Ponting and 16 other people at the moment probably are onto something here.
It really felt like to me that their plan to combat Bazball was to be like, I think Bazball won in that Bazball changed us more than we changed Bazball, right? Like we went into our shell a little. We decided, whereas what you want is you don't need to like set fields like Ben Stokes sets fields all the time or just like, make declarations out of nowhere or whatever. You don't have to be the joker, but you do need a bit of that about you. Like you take the best bits of that, the adventurous nature of that, the idea to experiment, to break something up. But also I think there is the same, and this is why I think the Nessa thing just annoys me the most, is Cummins is a good bowler and absolutely Hazelwood is a good bowler and Boland is a good bowler. But what we realised is when we started to play all these guys together, and it's why I think Stark did better than people thought he expected, is we're a bit the same. And if we can't tie them down, like I think I heard a stat that we only bowled 33 maidens for the entire series, which that's just not the Australian. Our way of Boland gets wickets by like bowling maiden after maiden after maiden until they get trapped. Even Cummins and Hazelwood, that's really been mostly the secret of their success. They're those bowlers that just do put it in the same spot. And then suddenly England have this thing which is like, well, if you're going to keep bowling it in the same place, we know what to do about that. We're going to bash you all over the place.
And aided by, because that approach works in Australia for us because there's almost always a little bit of something in some of the pitches, whether it's a bit of bounce or variation or pace or whatever. If England are just going to prepare autobahns.
Well, that's it. We knew what they were going to prepare.
Yeah.
I just don't think you can. It's not and this is where, because I think Cummins is a good captain. Like, I've enjoyed his captaincy. I think he's got a good record and I like a lot of what he does. But he needed a rest. Like, if he wasn't captain, he wouldn't have played one of those tests. We would have rested him because it just would have been better for him. And that's when it becomes a problem, because then you're like, well, how do we get that variety into our bowling lineup that we need to have?
And if you're willing to say that physically a player is in a state where they could ideally do with a rest, then probably in terms of adding on top of that the decisions of captaincy, they need a little bit more support around them where, it was the fourth test in particular, and it was the third and fourth tests in particular where decisions were made where we really could have gone a lot closer to wrapping that whole thing up.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's the thing that frustrates me the most about this series is that they'll look back and regret that they didn't get it done, honestly. And particularly because, there is going to be some serious conversations around the Australian team. Like, how much longer, is this, our team? What substantial changes are there going to be? There's going to be a new opener. Do we, because of what we've seen with, the changing shape of cricket, I know India, like, they've publicly stated they're going to lean into being more attacking in test match cricket. They think it's the future. If England, like some of these English players, they're going to get better because they're just going to go around the world beating up on opposition that aren't anywhere near as good as the Australians. I mean, they'll be a bit of a force in cricket for a while, I'd imagine. They've got obviously some players retiring as well, but you can see that next generation coming up through that English team. They're going to keep playing like this for a while. And so, like, does Travis Head open? Like, do we go back to the Australian summer and, like, you say Head's your opener and you look at, your middle order as I don't know if Harris or Renshaw are the answer, is, I guess, and that's what worries me. I'm not sure that, Pekovsky was clearly the answer, but he, with his concussions and his health, I don't think that's going to be what happens. So,
and the challenge for Australia within that will also be that, and this is something I respect so much about our cricket, but it then convexly becomes a problem in that scenario, is that we won't just prepare the placid pitches that really assist it. I mean, England will get better bullying some teams who are clearly out of their league around the world in the next couple of years, but bring that English team now in the fine fettle that it's in to Australia.
We smashed them. We'd still beat them in Australia.
The stat I read, which is amazing, was that Cam Green has played 3 tests in England. He's won 2 Ashes tests away from home. Stuart Broad's won 1 Ashes test away from home in his career.
Yeah, and this is
Stuart Broad.
This is the
600
only
test wickets.
This is the only compelling thing about the idea that the urn is retained to me, because in some ways I think now with like the World Test Championship, it takes the place of these, like, I'm not saying of the Ashes but the trophy or the urn, the retention. I think we should start judging series really based on the idea that it's a series, and like at the end of it, like, you can be tied at the end of the series and it's a tied series, but the idea of an urn or like a shield or whatever takes into account the idea that conditions are different in India than they are in Australia. Why India are such an admired cricket team for me isn't because when we go to India they prepare raging turners and rollers. It's the fact that they come to Australia and beat us that makes India a good team. And you're right. Like, I mean, the reason we retain the Ashes and that has some value is because when England came to Australia, we beat them 4-0 in our conditions. So there's an idea to that, you know, we tied this and we did our job and now they've got to come to Australia and see if they can actually, you know, beat us, you know, where we live as well. But,
and the magnitude of our trying to win there or even tie a series there is equivalent to the magnitude of for England trying to do it in Australia. And in the last decade have not looked like the shadow of a team that could do it. We're here with 2-2 going, oh, that could have been 3-1. England weren't looking at the last 4-0, the fifth one of which they scraped home 9 wickets down in the last innings that was in a match that was affected. They weren't looking at that going, oh, that was so close to 3-1 to us or 2-2 or anything like that.
I think the thing for the Australians is more that it could have been 3-1 so easily. And then it is a legacy-defining couple of months. The World Test Championship, 3-1, you know, win the Ashes for the first time in 20-odd years. Like that's because it is such a big thing. This team is a legacy team at that point, right? But they didn't. But I don't think they played like a legacy team. They played like a very good team that occasionally didn't look that good. And, you know, Steve Smith, like, you know, last night was a day for Steve Smith to be, you know, the old Steve Smith. And I think the truth of it is that Steve Smith is never going to – he's still had a good – you know, he's made a couple of hundreds. He's had an okay time. He just isn't the old Steve Smith, and maybe he's never going to be that again.
And the other thing you can say in favour of this Australian team is that it's also – I think it's an accepted maxim that really great teams also – just find ways to win when they're not playing at their best. And again, in AFL footy, you've seen it the team that are, you know, punch drunk and out on their feet and a little bit too old and then just still scrape and get those last couple of goals when needed to just playing on sort of muscle memory. And it's a tribute to this Australian team that they, you know, did what they managed to do in the first test when there were periods of time when we were in real trouble, but still comparatively fresh. Paddy Cummins and Nathan Lyon said, well, this is what we've got to do. Let's go and do it. There's only some teams that could have brought that about in that situation and ditto the second test.
And look, and we played, they certainly, you know, had outs from their team as well. And, you know, they were a much better team when Wokes and Wood were playing, like, you know, obviously. But, I mean, we think Todd Murphy, by the way, nothing against Todd Murphy. He's a real standout from his performance in this fifth test, both with the ball and the bat. Showed a lot for a 22-year-old kid. Definitely the future of Australian spin, and that role, if Nathan Lyon can't be there, is in very great hands. But Nathan Lyon is our most important player, I would argue, particularly in regard to all these issues we have about the sameness of our bowling. Like, you know, we obviously didn't even play a spirit in that fourth test, but like, you can't use Murphy in the same way as you use Lyon. Like, Lyon gives us our attacks never looked so boring because Lyon's always there to be able to bowl 30 overs if he needs to and actually, you know, tie up an end or keep things interesting or get a wicket or do his job. Like, so, you know, the fact that we managed to do it without him is a big tick. So spin, I think we're good. Nathan Lyon will come back at some stage. Yeah, he's valuable. Murphy's there for the next thing. Then it comes to our bowlers. I mean, obviously Cummins is going to keep playing. Like, do we need to look at someone who isn't Hazelwood or like Boland? Is it time for us to like be starting to see what, can Nessa play more regularly? Like, is Morris an option? Like, I'm just talking about having that bowler there that is variety.
Yeah,
you know,
no, I think absolutely, and it's challenging when you're talking about great players who've made a great contribution across a long period of time for the team. But that old aphorism about the Australian team that it's harder to get out of it than to get into it in sometimes is the case. And it's the same with Usman Khawaja, still batting superbly, but is at an age where history suggests when eventually it comes to an end, it can come to an end pretty quickly. You don't want a scenario where at the end of, say, the upcoming summer, Aussie thinks, that might do me as well. And he's got, just been sort of overlooked in the David Warner pre-booked farewell campaign. And then you're suddenly shuffling out both your openers and a couple of your quicks at the same time. It's time
the truth of it is that just based on performance, like in the last few years. I mean, Usman Khawaja's again scored the most runs in this series and is one of the top rated bats. Since he's come back and opened, he's the number one rated opener in the world. So we talk all about like how will we fill this water hole. But the water hole actually there hasn't been a lot of water coming from that well for a fair while. So actually filling that isn't anywhere near as difficult as we're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is what you like. I mean, obviously we'd love to, but Usman's exactly the same age as David Warner. So they played junior cricket together, opened the batting together when they were 8, like it's an incredible story. But the idea that we're like, how will we replace Warner? We have no options when we're like, yeah. And also, by the way, if this guy's getting too old, there is a chance that the guy who's the exact same age as him
and actually getting the runs.
Yeah. That's going to be a much bigger hole for us to fill if we're, we assume that he's going to keep doing it. But
if a new guy came in who wasn't quite up to scratch and only averaged, say, 25 in David Warner's position, that's pretty much business
Close
as usual
enough.
for Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
If he comes in replacing Uzi, who averages about 107 at the moment, you might feel that a little bit more.
We're really missing that 107 extra runs every innings that we had.
But then, where did we find Usman? We didn't find someone who'd been opening forever. We found a guy who'd batted more at 3s and 4s and things like that, and the opening came out of him. I think you're absolutely right that it's worth. I don't see Labuschagne as a test opener, but is it a Travis Head? Is it someone else? Is it a Cam Green? Is it the challenge with cricket at this level is you don't get as much time as you'd like to run these experiments a few times. Again, in like a 23-game AFL regular season, you can plonk someone out of position for a couple of games and see if it works and tweak it a bit. You don't get 3 or 4 tests to play with these sort of things and see if they work before you've blown a whole series on a failed experiment.
I think part of our problem at the top of the order, and of course we'll beat up on some teams in Australia over the summer and we'll ignore this, but maybe that's a good time for us to experiment. Part of the problem is the balance, I honestly believe, of our batting order. It just feels really out of whack to me in that Usman, like Uzi, I think Uzi's playing the role that Uzi's meant to play, which is you want an opener who's going to bat for as long as he possibly can. That's one of the opener's jobs, and he is doing that job particularly well. But then the reason you pair him with like a David Warner type is because the other one's meant to be like, attacking, getting you off to a start, putting scoreboard pressure on the bowlers, right? One's putting, I'm never going to get out, and the other one's getting some runs going. That's like a good dynamic for an opening partnership.
It works for me.
Because Warner's been struggling, like we haven't been able to get that same dynamic, right? Like, and so and then Marnus is a slow starter. Steve Smith is a slow starter. Both of them like tend to be, I mean, I know he isn't always, but they both have become real soak 'em up. So like our top 3, 4, even if they're making runs so slowly and like, giving the opposition so much opportunity to get them out. But then like a fucking Pixies song, we go from slow to Travis Head and Mitch Marsh and Cameron Green, who doesn't know whether he's meant to be hitting them hard or like blocking them again. There's no sense in it and no balance to it. And that's why I think if you are going to play Marsh or Green, like, but maybe even Marsh and Green sometimes, Head to open to me, you've still got a Marsh coming in the middle who you can give the license to do what Head had been doing. But you need someone at the top of the order who's going to put that, like, it's not going to work every time, but when it does work, we're going to make 150 in the first session and Travis Head's going to make 100 and, Usman will be 30 not out at the other end. But that's okay. That's good. That's what we want.
Because, too often you'll find us 2 for 70 well after lunch.
Right.
And that's potentially a platform if someone then fires, but you're only a wicket away from the other team having a real upper hand on you. Yeah.
Steve Smith, do you think he'll play on? Do you think he'll retire? Like, because there is a chance that they're like, over the next year, Warner goes, Khawaja goes, Steve Smith maybe goes. Like,
one or two of those fast bowlers go. You could have 4 or 5 guys out of this squad. They certainly won't go back to England and might not even defend the Ashes next time around in Australia.
And if you're not going back to England, and this has been sort of if you're not going to be there for the next World Test Championship, if you're not going to be there for the next Ashes, I think that's what we've got to start thinking about now, because we can't. I mean, I can't see us even in Australia going into a next Ashes with a bowling lineup like we had in this one. Like there's got to be somewhere a couple of new faces in there if we're gonna, because you could see that with England. Like if Broad, like Anderson's going on, but Broad, like I think Broad actually of all of them, he was the one where you were like, oh no, you could probably keep going on. It's probably Anderson that probably needs to stop at some stage, but. Anyway, it's been a great couple of months. Thank you to everybody who has listened to the show.
Let me give you one last bit of Test trivia.
Yes,
as we go. Who has the highest batting average in the history of Test cricket?
The highest batting average. Is this just not based on games played? So you don't have to, because the obvious answer is Sir Donald Bradman, 99.94, but that's probably based on you had to play a certain amount of games or make a certain amount of runs, which means that the answer to this question is probably someone who played like one test and made a huge amount of runs and then never played again or something
Australian.
like that. Martin Love.
I think Love was not out in the only test he played.
Yeah. Does that mean he doesn't have an average?
Indeed. Can't divide by zero. We should have got onto that a bit earlier. Test batting average of 144.
He played one test, made 144. Stuart Law.
Curtis Patterson.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Now 30 years old, captain of New South Wales.
You make him in Canberra? Is that where he
Yeah.
You made 100. I remember watching that. Beautiful batsman.
Yeah.
Like one of those ones that looked a bit like Matthew Hayden used to bat. Like, just a beautiful, elegant batsman. He was going to be everything. What happened to Curtis Patterson? How's he been going for New South Wales? Is he?
Yeah, there and thereabouts.
Yeah,
but
okay.
There's a spot there for him if he wants it.
I mean, it'd be great for someone to come along who really wants it. Like,
Curtis Patterson's 30 now. We need
we need a wunderkind. We need a young batsman. Where's our Harry Brook? Where's our next where's that person? Because it doesn't really feel like there is that sort of young, exciting next level batsman who's
the Australian cricket team at the moment is this.
Team.
Yeah, it's this interesting balance of like the best team in the world in terms of winning the World Test Championship and clearly competitive against any team in any conditions. And also it's almost looking a little bit rickety and old.
Yeah. Yeah, because you just can't see the obvious replacements.
No. The last dance.
Well, that's not a great note to finish the podcast on.
Those Matildas.
Oh, man, that was so good last night, though, because I watched that game going – because you were famously an advocate for, women's football in Australia. On Triple J, you used to talk.
Yep.
Like I think you at the time were probably the most prominent commentator on women's soccer in the country in the media, I would have thought back then. But I watched that game last night and I was like, I'm going to watch the Matildas and I'll watch the Ashes at the same time first session and hopefully we'll get a few runs and the Matildas will win. But if I have to pick between the two, I'd rather, I guess, probably see Australia win the Ashes than see the Matildas win. And then I was like, then they're probably not going to play Sam Kerr. We're probably going to lose. Like the Canadians won the Olympic medal. And then by the end,
stacked against them.
By the end of that game, I was just like, nah, this was the right result.
Oh, yeah.
Like this is better for Australia. Like, I mean, the fact that we won 4-0 and Sam Kerr did not have to play, which was couldn't have been. Speaking of coaches staring down the media, I mean, that fella, Gustafsson, is that his name?
Yes.
Gustafsson. He got a fair bit of feedback during the week about the way they've been handling the Sam Kerr injury. And I get that because as someone who's not invested in the game in the way that others are, Sam Kerr is, like women's soccer in Australia. And like I was getting to the point where I was like, fuck it, you play Miranda Kerr. I don't care. Just get a bloody Kerr out there on this bloody field and I was like, if they get like eliminated from the home World Cup and Sam Kerr did not take the field once, I was literally like going to lobby for Sam Kerr to get a passport to a country that did make the finals.
Yeah,
I was like, we just need to see her play.
Yeah, she's got a bit of a Nigerian vibe about her. Get her in there.
Whatever, Irish, she can do the accent. I don't care.
But it turns out before the game she gave the girls a speech because she was on the subs list to play last night if needed. But as you know, with a calf, it's really risky. And she said to the girls before the game last night, "Why don't you just go and win it for me so I don't have to play and I get another 6 days off? I know you can do it. Go and do it." And they just delivered in spades.
I mean, they really did, didn't they? They had, they kicked 4 goals, but they had a couple of others that were very line ball that weren't goals. And it was really an incredible at Melbourne's rectangular stadium. I noticed was where that was being played. And never heard of as a person who follows sport in Melbourne, I wasn't aware of Melbourne's rectangular stadium.
Well, can I just say to the PR and marketing people at that company, Rectangular, for their sponsorship of the stadium, just thank you.
Thank you to Rectangular.
There's only one parallelogram I'll work with. Yeah. I won't buy jack off Rhombus or Trapezium or anything, but Rectangular, they're my people.
I mean, I understand how sports like sponsorship and FIFA deals and all that sort of stuff works, but it's just so ridiculous hearing them call that at Melbourne's rectangular stadium.
At one of the other games, I was speaking to someone, I can't identify them, but works in some sort of government or tourism or sporting or stand administrator or some sort of authority who had to deal with FIFA around some of this stuff. And it's just, FIFA's so powerful and just gets things on their terms so automatically that some of the discussions these people are having to have with FIFA about, look, I understand entirely, but just the whole like they making us cover the statues out the front of the grounds just with dark sheets.
Yeah, that's not.
Because you're worried it might be political. So, no, look, his name's Shane Warne. Look, this is a long story, but I know he's the people's champion, but he's not aligned with any radical left-wing agenda look, we can show you footage. Yeah. Politics was the last thing on his mind. Don't worry.
Yeah, it is ridiculous.
It's Paul Adam Roos. He's not holding a severed head. That's the AFL trophy that he
if people want to see me live this weekend at the Sydney Comedy Store, I am doing my improvised show. What you talking about, Will? I am doing a series of, I think, 3 or 4 of those shows over the next few weeks. So if people want to
improvised, you're not even sure how many you're doing.
I am not sure. Haven't checked that. But Saturday afternoon is the first one at the Sydney Comedy Store at Moore Park, the Entertainment Quarter. And, of course, Gruen's back on the TV. You can find that on ABC iView. Thank you to everyone who's listened to this podcast over the last couple of months. Honestly, it was just the last minute, spur of the moment idea, but the audience for it has been very strong and very loyal. And if you've liked it, leave a comment or, share it with your friends if you think they would like to, listen back and hear all our ridiculous predictions. But if ever there was a series for ridiculous predictions, everyone was made look an idiot by pretty much everything that everyone said at every point in this series. Adam Spencer always has a book for sale or some things that can be plugged. So let's plug whatever it is that we can plug for you, Adam Spencer.
How about if you're in Sydney on August the 27th?
Oh, yeah.
Come along to the Enmore Theatre and watch Celebrity Theatre Sports, all made up on the spot. You think what you're talking about, Will, is improvised. Wait till you see us go around.
So I will be performing.
You will.
At Celebrity Theatre Sports for the first, making my theatre sports comeback after 20 plus years since I last played. But so I'm sure the whole town is abuzz with the fact that after my last triumphant performance, where I decided this is it for me, 20 years later, I'm back, baby.
No, FIFA are staying around. They're super keen.
Thank you so much, Adam Spencer.
Pleasure as always, mate.
Listener.